The night settles around you now, and in this moment, there is nowhere else you need to be. The day has released you. All that was carried can be set down. Tonight, we walk together through stories that remember what it means to be grateful, not as effort or obligation, but as the natural response of a heart that has learned to see. These are old stories, Zen stories, worn smooth by countless retellings, yet they remain true. They come from mountain temples and forest hermitages, from teachers who knew that wisdom lives not in complexity but in the simplest recognition of what is already here. So let yourself arrive fully into this space. Feel the weight of your body held by what supports you. Notice the breath as it comes and goes without your help. You are held, you are safe, and we begin. There was once a monk who lived in a small temple on the side of a mountain, and this temple was so remote that few visitors ever made the journey to find it. The path wound upward through groves of cryptomeria, those tall cedars whose bark peels in long strips like paper scrolls, and the air there was always cool, even in summer, scented with resin and the dampness of moss. The monk had lived in this temple for many years, perhaps 20, perhaps more. He had stopped counting after the first decade, finding that numbers created a kind of boundary around time that his practice sought to dissolve. His days followed the rhythm that mountains teach: rise before dawn, sit in meditation as darkness softens to gray, sweep the courtyard, tend the small garden, prepare simple food, sit again, walk the mountain paths, return to sit once more as evening comes. There was a well near the temple, very old, its stone rim worn smooth by centuries of hands drawing water, and each morning the monk would walk to this well with a wooden bucket, lower it into the darkness below, and draw up the cold, clean water that fed everything: his tea, his cooking, the plants in the garden, his own body's thirst. One autumn morning, as he walked to the well with his bucket, the monk noticed something he had never quite seen before, though he had performed this action thousands upon thousands of times. The bucket itself, as he held it by its rope handle, seemed suddenly miraculous. It was made of cypress wood, bound with copper bands that had turned green with age, and the wood had darkened over years of use until it was almost black, polished by water and by the touch of his hands. He stood there, holding the bucket, and felt how perfectly it was made for its purpose, the way the rope passed through the handle, carved from the same piece of wood as the body, the way the copper bands held the staves together with just enough tension, neither too tight nor too loose, the way the bottom was slightly curved, so that when it hit the water it would tip and fill. Someone had made this bucket, he thought. Someone had chosen this wood, had shaped these pieces, had fitted them together with such care that even now, after how many years he did not know, it still held water without leaking, still served exactly as it was meant to serve. The monk lowered the bucket into the well, heard the distant splash, felt the weight change as it filled, and drew it up hand over hand, the rope rough and familiar against his palms. As the bucket emerged into the morning light, water sloshing gently within its dark interior, he saw drops falling from its base, catching the slanted sunlight, each drop distinct and luminous for the half-second of its fall before it rejoined the reservoir below. He stood there watching these drops fall, one after another, and he thought, I have been drawing water from this well for 20 years, and I have never once thanked the bucket. I have never acknowledged what it does, how it serves, how without it my life here would be so much harder. I have taken it entirely for granted, as if buckets simply exist, as if their service is owed rather than given. He carried the water back to the temple, poured some into his kettle for tea, some into the stone basin in the garden, and as he did so, he found himself noticing everything the water touched the iron kettle, black and patient over the fire, waiting to transform cold water into steam and heat. The stone basin, gray and porous, holding water for the birds who came at dawn, the earthen cups from which he drank, formed by hands he would never know, fired in kilns he would never see. Each object, he realized, was an expression of someone's attention, someone's skill, someone's decision to make something useful and to make it well. The cup that touched his lips each morning had been shaped by a potter who cared about the curve of a rim, the balance of a base, the feel of clay against skin. The robe he wore had been woven by someone who understood thread and loom, dyed by someone who knew plants and minerals, sewn by someone whose stitches were small and even, meant to last. The monk sat down on the wooden platform outside the temple's main hall, the bucket beside him, and he placed his hands on its surface, feeling the texture of old wood, the slight roughness where the grain ran. He bowed to the bucket, not a large bow, not a ceremonial bow, but a simple inclination of his head, an acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for carrying water. Thank you for not breaking. Thank you for doing what you were made to do, so that I might live here and practice." It felt strange at first, talking to a bucket, but then it didn't feel strange at all. It felt like the correction of a long oversight, like the paying of a debt he hadn't known he owed. From that day forward, the monk began to offer this simple recognition to the things that served him. In the morning, when he struck the wooden block that signaled the start of meditation, he thanked the block and the mallet, both carved from oak, both shaped to make a sound that could cut through sleep and call attention home. When he swept the courtyard with his broom of bound twigs, he thanked the broom for gathering what was scattered, for the way it whispered across stone. When he ate his rice, he thanked the bowl, the chopsticks of bamboo, the pot that had cooked the grain, the spoon that had served it. He thanked the roof that kept out rain, the walls that held warmth, the floor that supported his weight. He thanked the candles that gave light, the matches that gave flame, the lamp oil that fed the wick through long hours of darkness. His teacher, who lived in a larger temple further down the mountain and who visited once each season, noticed this change during his next visit. The old teacher, whose name was Hakuin, watched as the monk prepared tea, observed how he touched each implement with a kind of careful attention, how he bowed slightly to the kettle before lifting it, how he steadied the whisk with both hands before setting it down. After tea, Hakuin said, "You have changed. Tell me what has happened." The monk told him about the bucket, about the morning when he had really seen it for the first time, about the gratitude that had opened like a flower he hadn't known was there. Hakuin nodded slowly. He said, "Most people spend their lives waiting for something extraordinary to be grateful for. They want the mountain to move, the sky to open. They do not see that the extraordinary is here, in the bucket that holds water, in the floor that does not collapse, in the lungs that breathe without being asked. You have stumbled onto the secret that is not secret at all. Everything is gift, and everything is teacher." The monk asked, "But teacher, is it not strange to thank objects? They have no awareness, no mind. How can they receive gratitude?" Hakuin picked up his teacup, turned it slowly in his hands, looked at the glaze that pooled in the base, the fingerprints of the potter still visible in the clay. He said, "When you thank the cup, who benefits?" The monk thought for a moment, then said, "I do. I am the one who remembers that this cup did not make itself, that it came into being through causes and conditions, through effort and skill and intention. I am the one who stops taking for granted what serves me. Hakuin smiled. He said, "Exactly so. Gratitude is not for the benefit of the object. It is for the benefit of the heart that learns to see truly. When you thank the bucket, you acknowledge the web of connection that brought it into your hands. You remember that you are not separate, not self-sufficient, that your life depends on 10,000 things working together in ways you will never fully understand. This remembrance is the beginning of wisdom." They sat quietly together as afternoon light stretched across the courtyard, and the bucket sat in the corner where the monk had placed it, and the tea grew cool in their cups, and there was nothing that needed to be said that had not already been said. After a time, Hakuin rose to leave. He bowed to the monk, and then, before turning toward the path, he bowed toward the bucket. The monk watched his teacher walk down the mountain until he disappeared among the cedar trees, and then he went inside to sit in meditation. But before he sat, he bowed to his cushion, to the floor, to the walls that held silence, to the roof above and the earth below. "Thank you," he said to the room, to the mountain, to the gathering dusk. "Thank you for holding me while I practice. Thank you for being exactly what you are." Seasons turned as seasons do, and the monk continued his life on the mountain. His practice of gratitude toward the things that served him became as natural as breathing, and he found that it changed everything and nothing. The bucket was still just a bucket, the broom still just a broom, the cushion still just cloth stuffed with kapok fiber. But his relationship to them had shifted, had deepened, had become something more honest. He no longer moved through his days in a fog of assumption, no longer treated the world as if it existed solely to meet his needs. Each morning when he drew water, he felt the conversation between his hands and the rope, between the bucket and the well, between the water and everything that would drink it. Each object became a doorway into presence, into the recognition that this moment, exactly as it is sufficient. Nothing needed to be added, nothing needed to be taken away. The bucket holds water. The floor holds weight, the walls hold space, and the heart, when it learns to see, holds everything with gratitude. Now we turn to another temple, in another season, where a different kind of gratitude was learning to take root. This temple sat not on a mountain but in a valley, near a river that ran green and clear over smooth stones, and it was autumn there, the maples turning colors that seemed impossible reds so bright they hurt to look at, golds that held sunlight even in shadow, oranges that blazed like controlled fire against the dark pines that climbed the valley walls. The temple was larger than the mountain hermitage, home to perhaps 15 monks who lived and practiced together, and among them was a young monk named Kosen who had come to the temple only 2 years before, fresh from a life in the city where he had worked in his family's shop selling bolts of fabric, measuring and cutting and wrapping, always in a hurry, always worried about money and loss and what the future might bring. Kosen had come to the temple seeking peace, seeking an end to the anxiety that had followed him through his days like a shadow. But he found that peace was not something given or found, but something that had to be cultivated with the same patient attention that a farmer gives to rice, and he was not yet patient. He rushed through his chores, wanting them to be over so he could get to what he thought of as real practice: sitting meditation, koan study, time with his teacher. He swept the courtyard impatiently, anxious to be done. He prepared food quickly, without attention, tasting nothing. He sat in meditation and counted the minutes until the bell would ring, his mind racing ahead to what came next, unable to settle into the simple fact of sitting, breathing, being present to this moment that was the only moment there ever was. His teacher, An old nun named Soshin, who had lived at this temple for 40 years, watched Kosen's struggle with quiet concern. She did not correct him directly, did not point out his rushing or his lack of presence, because she knew that direct teaching often bounced off the surface of the mind like rain off stone. Instead, she gave him a task. She asked him to care for the temple garden, which was not large but was intricate, filled with carefully placed stones and raked gravel, a few shaped pines, patches of moss, a small pond where koi swam in slow circles. Kosen accepted this task without enthusiasm. More work, he thought. More time taken from what he imagined was real practice, but he could not refuse his teacher. So each afternoon after the midday meal, he went to the garden with rake and clippers and bucket. At first, he approached the garden the way he had approached the fabric shop, with efficiency, with the goal of finishing. He would rake the gravel in quick strokes, clip the errant branches without really looking at them, pull weeds as fast as he could, always watching the sun to see how much longer until he could return to what he thought mattered. The garden did not respond well to this treatment. The gravel looked choppy, disturbed rather than peaceful. The plants seemed wounded by his hasty clipping. Even the koi, he imagined, swam more agitatedly when he was near, sensing his impatience like a disturbance in the water. One afternoon, as he was raking with his usual hurried strokes, trying to finish quickly because he wanted to attend a lecture on Dogen that one of the senior monks was giving, Soshin appeared at the garden gate. She stood there watching him for a long time, and finally she said, "Kosen, stop." He stopped, the rake poised mid-stroke, and turned to her. She said, "Come here, bring the rake." He walked over to where she stood, and she took the rake from his hands. She stepped into the garden and knelt, though she was 70 years old and her knees were not what they once were, and she placed the rake against the gravel. Then, very slowly, with infinite care, she drew the rake toward her, and the tines left parallel lines in the gray gravel, perfect and even, like lines of meditation, like the furrows in a rice field, like something that had all the time in the world to become what it was becoming. She raked perhaps 3 square feet of gravel this way, slowly, attentively, and then she stood up with some difficulty and handed the rake back to Kosen. She said, "This is your practice. Not later, when you finish this and move on to something you think is more important. This, right here, the rake, the gravel, the lines you make. When you are raking, just rake. When you are with the garden, just be with the garden. Do not wish to be somewhere else, doing something else. That wishing is what keeps you from peace. That wishing is what keeps you from gratitude." She looked at him with eyes that were kind but unflinching. She said, "You cannot be grateful for your life if you are always racing through it, trying to get to some future moment when you imagine you will finally be satisfied. Gratitude lives here, in this moment, in this task, in the weight of this rake in your hands." Kosen stood there holding the rake, and he felt something in his chest tighten and then release, like a knot coming undone. He bowed to Soshin, and she left the garden, and he knelt where she had knelt, and he placed the rake where she had placed it, and he drew it toward him very slowly, watching the lines appear, watching how the gravel moved, how the light caught the quartz fragments mixed in with the granite, how the sound of the rake was like a whisper, like a soft exhalation. He raked 1 square foot, then another, then another. He did not think about the lecture he was missing. He did not think about finishing. He thought only about the rake, the gravel, the lines, the way his body felt kneeling there, the way his breath moved in and out, The way the autumn light fell across the garden in long golden bands that would not last, that were already leaving, that were heartbreakingly temporary and therefore heartbreakingly beautiful. It took him 2 hours to rake the small gravel area that he usually rushed through in 15 minutes, and when he finished, he sat back on his heels and looked at what he had done. The lines were not perfect. He was not Soshin, did not have her decades of practice, but they were careful. They were attentive. They were the work of someone who was present, at least for these 2 hours, at least in this garden. And as he looked at the lines, he felt something he had not expected to feel. Gratitude, not for some grand thing, not for enlightenment or peace or the end of suffering, but for the rake, for the gravel, for the afternoon light, for the fact that he had hands that could hold tools, eyes that could see lines, a body that could kneel and rise, for the fact that there was a garden at all, that someone long ago had chosen these stones, had shaped these pines, had dug this pond, had created a space where the mind could settle and the heart could rest. He stood up slowly, bowed to the garden, and carried the rake back to the tool shed. As he walked, he noticed how the rake felt in his hands, its weight, its texture, the way the wooden handle had been worn smooth by years of use. He noticed the sound of gravel under his feet, the cool air on his face, the distant sound of the river moving over stones. He noticed that he was here, fully here, not racing ahead to the next thing, not regretting the past, but here, in this body, in this moment, in this life that was his to live and no one else's. And he thought, this is what she meant, this noticing, this being present to what is. This is gratitude, not as a concept or a feeling I try to manufacture, but as the natural result of actually being where I am. From that day forward, Kosin approached the garden differently. He went there each afternoon not as a chore to be finished, but as a practice to be entered, and he found that the garden taught him things his meditation cushion could not. The garden taught him patience, because plants grow at their own pace and cannot be rushed. It taught him acceptance, because weather comes and leaves and stones stay where they are and there is nothing to do but work with what is. It taught him impermanence, because the leaves fell and the flowers bloomed and faded and the seasons turned regardless of his preferences. And it taught him gratitude, because he could not care for the garden without noticing all the things that made the garden possible. The rain that fell, the sun that warmed, the earth that held roots, the insects that pollinated, the worms that aerated soil, the ancient geological processes that had created these stones, the human hands that had placed them with such care. One evening, as winter approached and the last leaves were falling from the maples, Soshin came to the garden again. She found Kosin covering the tender plants with rice straw, protecting them from the frost that would soon come. She watched him work, saw how his hands moved with care, how he tucked the straw around each plant as if he were tucking in a child, and she smiled. When he finished, she said, "You have learned something." He bowed to her and said, "I have learned that practice is not separate from life, that every action can be practice if I bring presence to it. That gratitude is not a feeling I wait for, but a way of seeing I can choose, moment by moment, task by task." She nodded. She said, "And what are you grateful for today?" Kosin thought for a moment. Then he said, "Today I am grateful for this rake, which is simple and well made and does exactly what it is meant to do. I am grateful for the straw that will keep these plants alive through winter. I am grateful for my hands, which can work. I am grateful for this garden, which has taught me more than any book. I am grateful for you, teacher, for seeing what I could not see, for giving me this practice disguised as a chore. I am grateful for this moment, right now, when the light is fading and the air is cold and I am tired and none of it needs to be different than it is." Sashin bowed to him, a deep bow of respect and acknowledgement. She said, "Now you are beginning to understand. Gratitude is not about being happy all the time or pretending that difficulty does not exist. It is about seeing clearly, about recognizing the gifts that are always present even in the midst of challenge. It is about not taking for granted the 10,000 things that support your life." They walked back to the temple together as darkness gathered, and Kosin carried the rake over his shoulder, and he thought about all the times he had rushed through his days in the city, never noticing, never being present, always chasing after something he thought would finally satisfy him. He thought about how that chase had brought only more anxiety, more hunger, never any lasting peace. And he thought about this afternoon, raking gravel, covering plants with straw, moving slowly, paying attention, and how that simple attention had brought something he had not expected, a sense of sufficiency, of enough, of being held by a world that gave and asked only that he notice, that he receive, that he say thank you. It was so simple, he almost could not believe it. The peace he had been seeking was not in some future moment when everything would finally be perfect. It was here, in the rake and the straw and the evening light, in the work of his hands and the breath in his lungs and the ground beneath his feet. It had always been here. He had simply been moving too fast to see it. The winter came to the valley temple, and the snow fell soft and thick and muffling sound, transforming the familiar world into something hushed and new. Kosin continued his work in the garden, though there was less to do now, mostly sweeping snow from the paths, checking that the protective straw remained in place, scattering seed for the birds who stayed through the cold months. He found that he loved the garden in winter as much as he had loved it in autumn, loved it differently, loved the way it taught him about rest and dormancy, and the faith required to believe that spring would come again even when everything looked dead. He would stand sometimes in the falling snow, the rake or broom in his hands, and feel the flakes landing on his face and melting there, and he would think, even this cold, even this darkness, even this apparent death, it is all part of the cycle, all necessary, all worthy of gratitude. The temple bell would ring for evening meditation, and he would return the tools to the shed, bow to the garden now disappearing under snow, and walk back to the meditation hall where the other monks were gathering. He would take his place on his cushion, arrange his robes, settle into his posture, and as he sat there breathing in the warm, dim hall with the sounds of 14 other people breathing around him, he would feel such gratitude for this simple thing, a warm place to sit, a community to sit with, a practice that had been preserved and passed down through centuries so that he, Kosin, a former fabric merchant who had known nothing of Zen 3 years ago, could sit here now and taste something of what the old masters had tasted. It seemed almost impossible, almost too much, this gift that he had done nothing to earn, that had simply been offered to him because he had asked, because he had shown up, because the Dharma does not belong to anyone and therefore belongs to everyone who reaches for it. Now we move to a different place, a different season, though the teaching remains the same, turning like a prayer wheel, returning always to gratitude, to presence, to the recognition of what is already here. This story takes place in early spring, in a small hermitage built into the side of a cliff, accessible only by a narrow path that switchbacked up through pine forest and emerged at last onto a stone ledge where the hermitage perched like a bird's nest, looking out over a vast valley where mist gathered each morning in the low places, and the river gleamed like hammered silver when the sun found it. The hermitage consisted of a single room built of stone and wood, with a roof of thatch that had to be repaired each autumn before the rains came. And in this room lived a monk named Daichi, who had been there alone for 5 years, who had come seeking solitude not to escape the world but to meet it more directly, without the buffers and distractions that society provides. Daichi's days were very simple, almost austere by the standards of even monastery life. He woke in darkness, sat in meditation as dawn came, ate a simple breakfast of rice or grain cooked over his small fire, spent the morning in study or walking meditation along the cliff paths, ate again at midday, worked in the afternoon at whatever needed doing, gathering firewood, repairing thatch, tending his tiny vegetable garden, mending clothes, sat again in the evening, ate a light supper, sat once more as night came, and slept. He rarely saw other people. Occasionally a monk from the monastery far below would climb up with supplies, rice, salt, oil, tea, and they would talk briefly, share a meal, and then the visitor would leave and Daichi would return to his solitude. Most days he spoke to no one, heard no human voice but his own, moved through his routines with a kind of wordless attention that was both his practice and his life. At first, when he had come to the hermitage, Daichi had struggled with loneliness, with doubt, with the voice in his mind that said this was foolish, that he should return to the monastery, that solitude was too difficult, too empty. But his teacher, who had done a similar retreat decades before, had told him, "The first year is the hardest. You will meet yourself in ways you have avoided. You will see your mind without any place to hide. Stay with it. Let the loneliness teach you. Let the silence teach you. Do not run away." And Daichi had stayed, and gradually, so gradually he had not noticed when it happened, the loneliness had transformed into something else, not into happiness exactly, but into a kind of companionship with solitude itself, a recognition that he was never actually alone, that the wind and the pines and the ravens and the stones were company enough, that the whole valley was alive and breathing, and he was part of it, not separate from it. In his 5th year at the hermitage, as spring arrived and the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared in his garden, Daichi began to notice something that perhaps had always been there, but that he had never quite seen with such clarity. He began to notice that everything he needed, everything that supported his life in this remote place, had to come from somewhere, had to be made or grown or gathered or carried. The rice he ate for breakfast had been planted in a paddy far below, had been tended and harvested and threshed and hulled by hands he would never see, had been loaded onto the back of the young monk who made the steep climb up to the hermitage once each month, had been carried for hours up a difficult path so that Daichi could eat, could live, could continue his practice. The salt that flavored his food had come from the sea, had been evaporated in great pans under the sun, had traveled hundreds of miles to reach him. The oil for his lamp had been pressed from seeds, the tea had been picked and processed, the cloth for his robes had been woven and dyed. Even here, in this hermitage where he lived so simply, where he owned almost nothing, where his life had been stripped down to what seemed like bare essentials, even here he depended on a vast network of labor and care and interconnection. He was not self-sufficient. He could not be. No one could be. The very idea of self-sufficiency, he realized, was a kind of delusion, a failure to see how deeply interdependent all life is. how much we depend on each other and on the earth itself and on conditions and causes stretching back before we were born and reaching forward beyond our death. This recognition came to him one morning as he was preparing his breakfast, measuring rice from the large sack in the corner of his room, and he found himself looking at the grain in his hand, each kernel white and smooth and perfect, and thinking about all the causes and conditions that had brought this rice to his palm: the sun and rain, the soil and the microorganisms within it, the rice plant itself, which had grown and flowered and set seed, the farmer who had planted and tended, the harvester who had cut, the thresher who had separated grain from chaff, the person who had packaged, the monk who had carried. Daichi stood there with the rice in his hand, and he began to cry. Not from sadness, but from a kind of overwhelming recognition of grace, of gift, of the impossible generosity of a world that gave and gave without keeping account, without demanding repayment. He thought, "I have done nothing to deserve this rice. I did not plant it or tend it or harvest it. I did not carry it up this mountain. It has been given to me freely so that I might live and practice. How can I receive this gift without gratitude? How can I eat this rice and not bow to all the hands and hearts and conditions that brought it here?" He rinsed the rice carefully, cooked it with attention, and when it was done, he served it into his wooden bowl, and he sat with the bowl in his hands, and he bowed low, forehead nearly touching the rim, and he said quietly into the steam rising from the rice, "Thank you. Thank you to the rice. Thank you to the earth and sun and rain. Thank you to the farmer and the harvester and the carrier. Thank you for this life you have given me. Thank you for another day." He ate the rice slowly, tasting each bite, feeling the texture, the warmth, the way it filled his belly and gave him energy and strength. He thought about how he often ate while thinking about other things, planning, remembering, barely tasting the food at all, treating it as fuel rather than as gift, as if eating were a mechanical necessity rather than a profound exchange with the world that sustained him. He thought about all the meals he had eaten in his life, thousands upon thousands of meals, and how rarely he had truly appreciated them, how rarely he had stopped to consider the miracle of transformation that was happening. Earth and water and sun becoming grain, becoming food, becoming his body, his blood, his bones, his breath. It was almost too much to comprehend, this alchemy, this constant giving and receiving that was the very substance of life itself. From that morning forward, Daichi made it his practice to acknowledge every meal with this same gratitude, and he found that this practice changed how he ate, how he cooked, how he thought about food and sustenance. Before each meal, he would pause and consider what was in his bowl, would trace back as far as he could the journey each ingredient had made to reach him, would acknowledge silently or aloud the beings and conditions that had made this meal possible. And as he did this, day after day, he found that his gratitude expanded beyond food to include everything else that supported his life. The water he drank from the spring below the hermitage, he would walk down the path to fill his bucket, and he would think about the rain that had fallen on distant mountains, about the underground streams that carried water through stone, about the spring itself that emerged cold and pure from the earth. And he would bow to the water, would thank it for flowing, for giving itself, so that he might drink and live. The firewood he burned to cook and to stay warm through cold nights, he would gather fallen branches from the forest, would carry them back to the hermitage, would split them with his axe, and as he worked he would think about the tree that had grown this wood, about the decades or centuries it had stood, about the storms it had weathered, about how it had given shade and shelter to birds and insects, and finally, falling, had given its body to the earth and to him to burn. to transform into heat and light. He would bow to the wood before placing it in the fire, would say thank you to the tree, to the forest, to the process of growth and decay that made all life possible. Even the stone walls of his hermitage, which had been there long before he arrived, which had been built by monks whose names he did not know, he would sometimes place his hand on the cool stone and feel gratitude for their labor, for their vision of creating a place where someone could practice in solitude, for the way they had chosen and placed each stone so carefully that even now, generations later, the walls still stood, still sheltered, still served. His teacher came to visit one spring day, making the long climb up from the monastery, and they sat together on the stone ledge outside the hermitage, looking out over the valley where afternoon light was making gold of the new leaves and the river wound like calligraphy through the green land. Daichi prepared tea, and as he poured it into 2 cups, he said to his teacher, "I have discovered something obvious that I somehow never saw before. I have discovered that I am completely dependent, that everything I have and everything I am comes from beyond myself, from a web of connection and causation that I can barely comprehend. And instead of feeling burdened by this dependence, I feel grateful. I feel held. I feel part of something so much larger than my small self." His teacher sipped the tea, smiled, said nothing for a long time. Finally, he said, "This is what the Buddha meant when he taught dependent origination, when he said that all things arise in dependence on causes and conditions, that nothing exists independently, that everything is connected to everything else. But it is one thing to understand this intellectually, to nod your head at the teaching, and another thing entirely to feel it, to live it, to recognize it in the rice you eat and the water you drink and the roof over your head. You have moved from understanding to realization. This is good. This is practice bearing fruit." Daichi said, "But teacher, sometimes the gratitude feels almost painful, almost too much. When I really see how much I have been given, how much has been offered to me freely, I feel almost crushed by the weight of the gift. How can I ever repay it? How can I ever give back what has been given to me?" His teacher set down his teacup, looked at Daichi with those old eyes that had seen much and forgotten nothing. He said, "You cannot repay it. This is important to understand. You cannot balance the ledger. The gift is too vast, the debt too large. But this is not a problem. This is actually the point. The practice is not to repay the debt, but to receive the gift fully, to let yourself be sustained by the generosity of the world, and then to pass that generosity forward. You practice, you sit, you wake up, if you are lucky, and then you live in a way that honors what you have received. You become yourself a source of generosity, not because you owe it, but because you have been so filled by receiving that giving becomes natural, becomes the only possible response." He continued, "Think of the rice plant. It receives sun and water and soil. It does not try to repay these gifts. It simply grows, flowers, makes seed, and those seeds feed you, and they also fall to the earth and become new plants. The plant gives because it has received. This is the way of things. You receive practice from the lineage of teachers stretching back to the Buddha. You receive food and shelter and all the conditions that make your life possible. You do not repay these gifts by feeling guilty or indebted. You honor them by receiving them fully, by practicing with your whole heart, and by offering to others what has been offered to you. This is how the gift continues, how the Dharma is passed on, how the web of connection is strengthened and renewed." Daichi sat with this teaching, let it settle into his bones, and he understood that his teacher was right. Gratitude was not meant to be a burden, not meant to be another form of obligation or debt. It was meant to be a recognition of abundance, a seeing of how much had been given, how much was always being given, and a natural response of the heart that has learned to receive. He thought about his years in this hermitage, about all he had learned in solitude, about the silence and the wind and the ravens and the way the mist moved in the valley. He thought about how all of this had been given to him freely, the hermitage itself, built by unknown hands, the path up the mountain, maintained by generations of monks, the forest and the cliff and the spring, the teaching and the practice and the lineage. None of it was his. All of it was on loan, was passing through his hands for a brief time before moving on to whoever came next. As the afternoon deepened and his teacher prepared to make the descent back to the monastery before darkness came, Daichi said, "I will stay here for 1 more year, and then I think I will return to the monastery. I think it is time to offer to others what has been offered to me. I cannot teach as you teach, but I can carry rice up the mountain for whoever comes to this hermitage next. I can tend the garden at the monastery. I can sit with the new students who are struggling as I once struggled. I can try to pass on this practice of gratitude that has transformed how I see, how I live." His teacher bowed to him, a bow between equals, and said, "This is wisdom, to receive fully and then to give. This is the path that never ends, the circle that is always complete and always beginning again." After his teacher left, Daichi sat in meditation as evening came, and through the open door of the hermitage he could see the valley growing dark, the mist rising, the first stars appearing in the deep blue sky. He could hear the wind in the pines, constant companion, and the distant sound of water moving over stone. He thought about gratitude and how it had become the ground of his practice, the lens through which he saw everything. Not gratitude as a technique or a method, not gratitude forced or fabricated, but gratitude as the natural response of a heart that had learned to see truly, to recognize the gift that was always being offered, the grace that held everything. He bowed there in the gathering darkness, bowed to the hermitage and the cliff and the valley, bowed to the path that had brought him here and the path that would lead him back down, bowed to his teacher and to all the teachers before his teacher stretching back through time, bowed to the rice and the water and the wood and the stone, bowed to his own difficult journey and to the silence that had been his greatest teacher, bowed to the life he had been given and to the unknown future that waited. And as he bowed, he whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for everything, for this breath, for this moment, for the chance to wake up, however briefly, to the extraordinary gift of being alive. Thank you." Our fourth story takes us to a small village at the edge of a bamboo forest, where spring had just arrived and the bamboo shoots were pushing up through the earth, growing so fast you could almost see them move if you watched long enough, which the children of the village sometimes did, sitting very still among the green stalks, waiting to witness the miracle of growth made visible. The village was very old, built along a stream that came down from the mountains and provided water for the rice paddies that stretched out in terraces below the village, and the people there lived much as their ancestors had lived for centuries, planting and harvesting rice, keeping small gardens, raising chickens and a few pigs, making tofu and miso and pickles, weaving cloth, repairing tools, caring for their children and their elders. marking the seasons with festivals and ceremonies that connected them to the rhythms of the earth and the teachings of the Buddha, who had walked in India so long ago that his presence had become like weather, like something that had always been there, woven into the fabric of life itself. In this village lived an old woman named Mitsu, who was perhaps 70 years old, perhaps older. She herself was not certain, as birth records had not been carefully kept when she was young, and besides, the exact number seemed unimportant, just another way of marking time when time itself was the least interesting thing about a life. Mitsu lived alone in a small house at the edge of the village, near where the bamboo forest began, and she had lived alone for many years, since her husband had died and her children had grown and moved to the city to find work in the factories and offices there. She saw her children rarely now, perhaps once a year during the Obon festival when families were expected to return to their ancestral homes. And though she missed them in a way that had become so familiar it was almost comfortable, like an old scar, she did not resent their absence. They had their lives to live, their own children to raise, their own struggles and joys. This was the way of things. Leaves fell from trees, children grew and left, parents grew old and eventually died. It was not sad, she thought. It was just true. Mitsu spent her days doing small tasks that seemed to matter only to her and perhaps not even to her. Tasks that were not important in any grand sense, but that gave shape and purpose to the hours between waking and sleeping. She kept a small garden where she grew vegetables, daikon radish and Chinese cabbage and green onions and shiso. She swept her house and the path in front of it. She walked to the village shop to buy rice and soy sauce and sometimes a piece of fish. She prepared her meals with care, even though she ate alone. She washed her few dishes. She mended her clothes. She fed the stray cat that had adopted her and slept on her porch. She walked sometimes into the bamboo forest, following the narrow paths that wound among the tall green stalks, listening to the sound the wind made as it moved through the leaves, a sound like water flowing, like whispered secrets, like the earth breathing. The villagers were kind to Mitsu, would stop to talk with her when they passed her house, would bring her food, sometimes a pot of soup, fresh mochi during New Year, persimmons in autumn, and she was grateful for their kindness. But she did not need much from them, had learned long ago to be content with very little, to find sufficiency in the simple routines of each day. She had never been what you would call a Buddhist, had never studied the sutras or sat in formal meditation, had never been to the temple except for funerals and festivals, but she had absorbed something of the teaching simply by living in a culture shaped by it, had learned without knowing she was learning that suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are, that peace comes from acceptance, that the present moment is all we ever have and therefore deserves our full attention. One morning in spring, Mitsu woke before dawn as she always did, and she lay in her futon listening to the birds beginning their morning songs, and she found herself thinking about her life, about all the years she had lived, about everything that had happened and everything that had not happened. She thought about her childhood in this same village, running through the bamboo forest with other children, catching tadpoles in the stream, helping her mother plant rice in the flooded paddies, the water cold and the sun hot and her back aching, but everyone singing as they worked, the old planting songs that no one sang anymore. She thought about meeting her husband at a village festival, how shy they had both been, how their marriage had been arranged by their parents, but how they had grown to love each other anyway, slowly, carefully, like plants growing toward light. She thought about bearing her 3 children, the pain and the joy of it, the way each birth had broken her open and then reformed her into someone new. She thought about all the meals she had cooked, thousands upon thousands of meals, the endless preparation of food that was eaten and gone and had to be prepared again. She thought about all the laundry she had washed, all the floors she had swept, all the small invisible tasks that made up a life. And as she lay there thinking about all of this, Mitsu felt something unexpected, a wave of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. She was grateful for her life, for all of it, even the hard parts, even the losses, even the loneliness that was her companion now. She was grateful for this morning, for the bird songs and the dawn light beginning to show through the paper screens of her window, for the fact that she could still hear and see and move, that her body, though old and stiff, still functioned, still carried her through her days. She was grateful for this house, simple as it was, for the roof that did not leak and the floor that was smooth and clean, for the futon that had held her body for so many years. She was grateful for the garden waiting outside, for the green shoots already pushing up through the earth, for the promise of food to come, for the cycle of planting and growing and harvesting that connected her to every person who had ever lived by the work of their hands. Mitsu got up, folded her futon, washed her face in the basin of water she had prepared the night before, dressed in her simple work clothes, and went outside. The morning was cool and fresh, the sky that particular shade of pale blue that comes just after dawn, and the bamboo forest beyond her garden was making its morning sounds, creaking and rustling as the wind moved through. She walked to her garden and knelt at the edge of it, her knees protesting but willing, and she looked at the earth, at the dark soil she had tended for so many years, and she placed her hands flat on the ground. "Thank you," she said quietly, to the earth, to the morning, to the life she had been given. "Thank you for holding me. Thank you for feeding me. Thank you for another day." She began her morning work, pulling a few weeds, checking the moisture of the soil, noting where new growth was appearing. As she worked, she found herself noticing things she usually passed over without thought, things that were so familiar they had become invisible. She noticed how the earthworms moved through the soil, how they aerated it and enriched it with their castings, how they worked tirelessly without any recognition or reward, just doing what earthworms do, which was exactly what needed to be done. She noticed how the water she poured onto the plants soaked into the ground, disappearing into the earth where roots waited to drink it, how this simple action connected her to the rain that fell and the snow that melted and the rivers that flowed to the sea and evaporated and became clouds and fell again as rain. She noticed how the sun was warming her back as she knelt there, how the light was the same light that fed the plants, the same light that had traveled across space to reach this small garden, this old woman, this moment. After tending the garden, Mitsu went back inside and prepared her breakfast, and as she cooked her rice and miso soup, she found herself continuing this practice of noticing, of acknowledging, of giving thanks. She thanked the rice for nourishing her, thanked the pot for cooking it, thanked the fire for heating it, thanked her own hands for being able to perform these tasks that she had done so many times she could do them almost without thinking. She set her simple breakfast on her low table and sat before it, and before she ate she pressed her palms together and bowed her head and said the words she had said before every meal since childhood, words so familiar she usually spoke them without thinking, but today she said them slowly, meaning each word. "I humbly receive this food, which comes to me through the work of many beings. May I be worthy of it. May I use the energy it gives me wisely. May I be grateful for all that sustains me." She ate slowly, tasting each bite, and she thought about how different this meal felt when she approached it with gratitude, with attention, with awareness of all the connections it represented. The rice had been grown by farmers she would never meet, had been milled and packaged and transported and sold by people whose names she did not know. The seaweed in her miso soup had been harvested from the ocean, had traveled from the sea to her bowl through the work of many hands. Even the bowl itself, simple clay glazed brown, had been shaped by a potter somewhere, had been fired in a kiln, had been chosen from among many bowls and brought to this village, and somehow had found its way into her hands. Everything on her table, everything in her house, everything she wore and used and depended on it had all come from beyond herself, had all been created or grown or made by others, had all been given to her in exchange for money or labor, or simply given freely as gift or kindness. Mitsu finished her breakfast, washed her dishes, and decided to take a walk into the bamboo forest, something she did most days but today felt called to do with particular intention. She walked slowly along the path that led from her garden into the trees, feeling the ground beneath her feet, noticing how the temperature dropped as she entered the shade of the bamboo, how the light turned green and filtered, how the sound of the village faded and was replaced by the creaking and rustling of the tall stalks. She had walked this path hundreds of times, knew every turn and rise, knew where the roots crossed the path and where the small shrine stood, just a stone marker and a place to leave offerings. But today it felt new, as if she were seeing it for the first time. She walked until she came to a place where a fallen log lay across the path, smooth and silvered with age, and she sat down on it to rest. All around her the bamboo rose tall and green, and the light filtered down in thin beams that caught the dust motes drifting in the air, making them visible, making them dance. Mitsu sat very still and listened. She could hear the wind in the leaves high above, could hear the distant sound of the stream, could hear birds calling to each other, could hear her own breath going in and out. She felt a great stillness settle over her, a sense of being exactly where she was meant to be, of belonging to this moment, to this place, to this world that held her so gently. And sitting there on the log in the bamboo forest, Mitsu understood something she had perhaps always known but had never quite articulated. She understood that gratitude was not something separate from life, not something added on or cultivated as a practice, but something that arose naturally when you paid attention, when you really saw what was here, when you stopped taking everything for granted and recognized the extraordinary gift of ordinary existence. She had lived 70 years or more, had experienced joy and sorrow, health and illness, connection and loss. And all of it had brought her to this moment, sitting on this log, breathing this air, alive in this body that would not be alive forever but was alive now, was functioning now, was allowing her to see and hear and feel and think. She thought about all the people who had helped her throughout her life, all the kindnesses she had received, large and small. Her parents, who had fed and clothed her, who had taught her how to work and how to live. Her husband, who had been patient with her and had laughed with her and had held her when their son died in infancy, before the other two were born, before they knew they would be able to bear that loss and continue. Her children, who had given her purpose and joy and had taught her about love that asks nothing in return. Her neighbors, who had supported her when her husband died, who had brought food and company and had helped with the heavy tasks she could not do alone. The shopkeeper who always greeted her kindly, who sometimes slipped an extra item into her basket when he thought she wasn't looking, who asked about her health and seemed to genuinely care about the answer. And beyond the people, Mitsu thought about all the things that supported her life, things she had never made or earned or deserved, but that were simply here, simply available. The earth that grew food, the rain that watered it, the sun that warmed it, the air she breathed, never running out, never asking payment, just there, always there, filling her lungs 20,000 times each day without her conscious attention. The water in the stream, clean and cold, that she could drink when she was thirsty. The bamboo forest itself, which asked nothing of her but gave her shade and beauty and peace, which had stood here long before she was born and would stand here long after she died, offering its quiet strength to whoever needed it. Mitsu sat on the log for a long time, and she found that her heart was full, almost overflowing, with a feeling she could only call love. Not love for any particular person or thing, but a more general love, a love for existence itself, for the fact that there was something rather than nothing, for the fact that she had been given this life to live, this consciousness to experience, these eyes to see with. She thought, I have been so blessed. I have been given so much, and I did nothing to deserve it. It was simply given, all of it. Every breath, every moment, pure gift. She stood up from the log with some difficulty, her knees stiff from sitting, and she bowed to the bamboo forest, a deep bow of gratitude and respect. Thank you, she said aloud, her voice sounding small in the vastness of the forest. Thank you for being here. Thank you for holding this space. Thank you for teaching me about strength and flexibility, about how to bend in the wind without breaking, about how to grow toward light while staying rooted in darkness. Thank you for the shade and the beauty and the peace. The bamboo did not answer, of course, but Mitsu felt that her gratitude had been received, had been absorbed into the forest itself, had become part of the great web of connection that bound all things together. She walked back toward her house slowly, and as she walked, she continued to give thanks. Thank you to the path for being smooth. Thank you to my feet for carrying me. Thank you to my eyes for seeing. Thank you to this body that has served me for so long, that has asked so little and given so much. Thank you for the pain that reminds me I am alive. Thank you for the stiffness that teaches me about aging and impermanence. Thank you for this day, this moment, this breath. By the time she reached her house, her cheeks were wet with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing clearly what had always been there, of understanding at last the profound generosity of existence itself. That evening, as the sun was setting and the light turned gold over the village, Mitsu sat on her porch with a cup of tea, and the stray cat came and sat beside her, and she stroked its fur and felt its warmth and listened to it purr. She thought about how she would live the rest of her life, however long or short that might be, and she knew that she would try to live with this awareness, this gratitude, this recognition of gift. She would not always succeed. Old habits were strong, and the mind had its patterns, but she would try. She would try to notice, to pay attention, to say thank you, to receive what was offered with an open heart. She would try to be worthy of the life she had been given, not by doing great things or achieving recognition, but simply by being present, by seeing truly, by letting herself be held by the world that had always held her. As darkness came and the stars began to appear, Mitsu thought about the teaching she had heard long ago from a visiting monk who had come to the village temple. Something about how the Buddha had said that wisdom and compassion arise naturally when we see things as they truly are, when we recognize the interconnection of all beings, when we understand that we are not separate, not isolated, but part of an infinite web of relationship and mutual support. At the time, Mitsu had not understood what the monk meant. It had seemed abstract, philosophical, removed from her daily concerns. But now, sitting here on her porch with her tea and her cat and the evening coming on, she understood this was what he had meant, this recognition of connection, this gratitude that arose from seeing how much had been given, how much was always being given. This was wisdom, not something learned from books or earned through effort, but something revealed when the heart opened, when the scales fell from the eyes, when you stopped long enough to really look at the world you lived in. Mitsu finished her tea, brought the cup inside, prepared her simple dinner, ate it with gratitude, cleaned up, spread her futon, and lay down to sleep. As she lay there in the darkness, she thought about tomorrow, about the garden that would need tending, about the meals she would prepare, about the small tasks that made up her days. And she thought, tomorrow I will practice gratitude again. I will try to remember what I felt today. I will try to see the gifts that are always being offered. And even if I forget, even if I fall back into the old patterns of taking things for granted, that is all right. I can begin again. Each moment is a chance to begin again. Each breath is an opportunity to wake up, to notice, to give thanks. And with that thought, Mitsu closed her eyes and let herself drift towards sleep, feeling grateful even for this, for the softness of her futon, for the quiet of her house, for the bamboo forest breathing in the darkness beyond her walls, for the village sleeping around her, for the earth turning beneath her, for the stars wheeling overhead, for the mysterious gift of consciousness that would soon dissolve into dreams and then into the deeper darkness of sleep, only to return again when morning came, when the birds sang, when another day began, when she would once again have the chance to open her eyes and see the world and whisper, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," for this extraordinary, ordinary life. The night settles deeper now, and these stories have brought us to where we always arrive, to the recognition that everything is gift, that we are held by a generosity too vast to comprehend, that gratitude is not something we create, but something we discover when we learn to see truly. The monk with his bucket, Kosen with his garden rake, Daichi in his hermitage, Mitsu in her bamboo forest, each of them found the same truth in different forms. That peace comes not from having more or being more, but from recognizing what is already here, already given, already enough. Let yourself rest now in this recognition. Let your body settle into the support beneath you. Let your breath flow naturally, without effort. Let the day release you. You have been held your whole life by a world that gives without counting the cost. You have been supported by 10,000 hands you will never see, by causes and conditions stretching back before you were born. This is true. This has always been true, and it will continue to be true tomorrow, when you wake and begin again. So rest now. Let gratitude be the last thought before sleep takes you. Let it be the ground from which you arise in the morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for this moment we have shared. May you sleep deeply. May you wake refreshed. May you carry this recognition of gift with you into whatever comes next. The stories are complete. The night holds you. All is well.